Good evening, I'm Diana Skaya and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. 44 billion euros earmarked for Poland's defense industry. The Polish parliament has approved the European SAFE program. The question is, what will Conservative President Karol Nawrocki now do? Will he approve or veto it? More on that later, but first, here are the headlines. The EU is pressing ahead with the Mercosur trade deal despite a pending court decision on its legality. And as investigations into corruption heat up, Albanians are calling for officials to step down. And the Polish economy is gathering momentum, ranking high among other fast-growing EU nations. A major decision now looms in Warsaw over Poland's participation in the European Union's SAFE mechanism, a bloc-wide program designed to help member states finance large-scale defense equipment purchases across the European market together. Now, under the plan, Poland stands to gain nearly 44 billion euros in low-interest loans to modernize and strengthen its armed forces. But now the final step is in the hands of the Polish president. Will Karol Nawrocki sign the bill into law, or will he instead put it on the back burner? Piotr Miszczuk has the story.
Here we go again. For the second time, the lower house of the Polish parliament has approved a bill concerning Poland's participation in the SAFE mechanism, this time greenlighting amendments proposed by the upper house. Now the ball is squarely in Polish President Karol Nawrocki's court.
I will not say today what decision I will make. I still have a few weeks to make that decision.
Though now hesitant, President Nawrocki, who associates with the opposition Law and Justice Party, has already voiced concerns about the bill before.
Yes, the Polish army does need as much money as the SAFE loan provides. However, there are doubts regarding the issue of sovereignty.
The leader of the opposition party was somewhat more straightforward about his reservations.
Even if we had to pay a little more, it would be incomparably more profitable for Poland and for the personal future and prosperity of Poles and Polish families than what is being proposed to us, that is a Poland under a German heel.
But Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk addressed these claims at a Friday press conference.
Do you know how much this renowned German industry will benefit from the SAFE program that we are implementing in Poland? It's 0.37%, and we are talking about a German-Swedish company here.
Acquiring funds from the SAFE mechanism means Poland could see a significant boost throughout many sectors, including artillery and air defense systems. According to Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, the first anti-drone systems financed by SAFE could be delivered to the Polish army as early as this year.
If the SAFE instrument is not in place and we fail to shoot down Russian drones over Poland in the event of another attack, those who vote against SAFE will bear joint responsibility for this.
But analysts say the Law and Justice's objection to SAFE reaches beyond the concerns raised in public. Given that only European-made weapons could be bought with SAFE funds, they say it is more about a vision of where Poland should lie in the Western world's greater security architecture.
Law and Justice, the place is alongside the Americans, but in a transactional relationship, and in the thinking of Donald Tusk and the government. As the Foreign Minister set out yesterday in his foreign policy address in Polish Parliament, Poland's place is much closer to Europe.
The government has already said that should Nawrocki veto the bill, they will seek alternative ways to bring the money from SAFE to Poland. The president now has 21 days to make a final decision. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Friday announced the provisional implementation of the long-awaited EU-Mercosur trade agreement. Though still divisive among several member states, the deal comes at a time when Europe seeks to diversify its trade partnerships amid growing uncertainty in their transatlantic relationship. Zuzana Jurek explains.
This is about European resilience, said the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, whilst announcing the provisional implementation of the EU-Mercosur trade agreement on Friday. Now, the deal was 25 years in the making and was originally signed on January 17th, following which, after an outcry by members of the European Parliament, it was directed for a judicial review to the European Court of Justice to see whether its provisions align with the EU's laws and regulations. Now, whilst the judicial review is pending, the European Commission did reserve a right to implement the deal provisionally, which is exactly what happened today, after the ratification by at least one member state of Mercosur, that is the South American trading bloc, which is what happened on Thursday with first Uruguay and then Argentina. Now, speaking on Friday, Ursula von der Leyen underlined that this deal is crucial and the implementation of this deal is crucial to European trade sovereignty.
It is a platform of deep political engagement with partners who see the world as we do and who believe in openness, in partnership and good faith. This is about resilience, this is about growth and Europe shaping its own future.
Now, the issue had been fairly contentious in the bloc, with some member states, including Germany, strongly pushing for the deal to get signed and ratified as quickly as possible, whilst others, including Poland, France and Hungary, staunchly against it, particularly as it could potentially lead to unfair competition for domestic producers. Additionally, farmers have been taken to the streets across Europe over the last couple of months, also expressing their opposition. But despite this wave of protests and despite this wave of European opposition, other policymakers, including Finland's Alexander Stubb, have underlined during an exclusive interview with TVP World on the record that the signing of this deal comes at a time that is imperative to diversify relationships away from the transatlantic relationship and a wavering commitment of the US, both in the military as well as trade spheres, to Europe, and it's really a question of Europe's survival.
People around the world, including Europe, will also be looking to hedge their bets elsewhere. Therefore, we do a trade agreement with Mercosur. Therefore, we do a trade agreement with India. And therefore, we'll probably at some stage open negotiations on an investment agreement with China. Not free trade yet. And you're going to start seeing that a lot. And that's something that we talk about with our American friends as well, that realize if you're throwing tariffs at us and China is bringing tariffs down, then which do you deal with?
Now, the final ratification of the deal can only take effect after the judicial review is concluded, which is expected to take several more months. Now, when it comes to what this move by Ursula von der Leyen on Friday will mean, it will mean the immediate removal of certain trade barriers and tariffs, whilst other issues such as investment protection will have to wait until the full ratification. In the meantime, more protest and opposition is expected across Europe. From Brussels for TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his Slovakian counterpart Robert Fico have agreed to set up a joint investigative committee into disruptions along the Druzhba pipeline. Now, both leaders allege, without evidence, that Ukraine is obstructing the flow of cheap Russian oil via the pipeline to their countries. But as our correspondent Andrew Sweeney reports, the timing of the move is drawing scrutiny. With Hungary heading toward a general election on April 12 and Orbán trailing in the polls, questions are emerging over whether the investigation is about energy or electoral strategy.
1 month since Russian oil stopped flowing through the Druzhba pipeline to Hungary and Slovakia, the country's prime ministers have a joint response.
Viktor Orbán speaking from Budapest. Prime Minister, good morning. Robert, how are you?
I agreed with Robert Fico that we will set up a Hungarian-Slovakian investigative committee to clarify the status of the Druzhba pipeline. I urge President Zelensky to let in the Hungarian and Slovakian inspectors and to restart the Druzhba oil pipeline. This group should be composed of representatives of Slovakia, Hungary, but undoubtedly also representatives of the European Commission, and this inspection group should be allowed to visit the place of the Druzhba oil pipeline.
Both Orbán and Fico blame Ukraine for stopping the flow of Russian oil. They have not provided any evidence to back this up. They've blocked diesel and electricity exports in response, as well as the EU's 20th round of Russian sanctions and the €90 billion military loan for Kyiv.
I don't think there's anything that Ukraine should do more or can do more, right? At this point, Prime Minister Fico seems to be thinking differently. He considers this to be a political decision.
The Hungarian government also has politics on its mind. It wants to make clear it's in control ahead of general elections on April 12th. Today it announced plans to build a second pipeline to pump oil and gas via Serbia.
It is completely realistic that an oil pipeline will connect Serbia and Hungary by the end of next year. But today we decided to go even further and are ready to build another pipeline in addition to the oil pipeline. This will increase the security of the supply of fuel, diesel and gasoline for both Hungary and Serbia.
And Orbán has claimed that Kiev plans to attack energy infrastructure in Hungary. Propaganda posters published by his anti-EU Fidesz party that demonise Ukraine are a common sight. For Peter Magyar, whose pro-Europe teaser movement is up to 20% ahead in the polls, Orbán's demonisation campaign is poisonous.
Those billboards we see around are about inciting war, a struggle against someone. This is poisoning the mental well-being of the Hungarian people. It scares children and the elderly. I think there is no need for that.
Poland's position on Russian energy is clear. It's a poisonous policy. That's according to President Karol Nawrocki from the Conservative Law and Justice Party.
In my opinion, there's no question that importing gas from Russia is a bad thing. I am very much opposed to it. The security of Poland and all of Central and Eastern Europe hinges on our energy security, among other factors.
Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who's already endorsed Magyar, is from the centrist Civic Platform Party. He's often at odds with Nawrocki, but not this time.
Is Hungarian Spring really Magyar Tavas in your language, dear Prime Minister Orbán?
Magyar means Hungarian, a play on words, and an expectation of change in Budapest. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
Trust in the United States is showing signs of strain not only in Poland but across Europe. Polish Foreign Minister Robert Fico admits the transatlantic relationship has changed and not in ways Warsaw would have chosen. Kazimierz Wysiak explores how Europe is preparing to diversify and redefine its alliances.
Poland's foreign policies for 2026 have been laid out clearly by Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski. Among them, a noticeable shift in approach to transatlantic relations.
Europe has been tossed to the side, while Russia is described as a potential partner for an economic reset. We read that in the US national security strategy and hear that in discussions. We have been and will remain a loyal ally of America, but we cannot be suckers.
But Minister Sikorski also says this change in relations is not in any way Poland's wish, but rather the direct result of the actions of US President Donald Trump.
Poland or Europe or NATO won't have the same level of commitment from the United States as it has done in the past, and Trump has sort of made that clear. And so we have to try and man up, muscle up as Europeans.
And that sentiment has been echoing across Europe.
So of course I would prefer that relationship to be very stable and solid. But right now it's shifting. Let's be honest about it. That's how it is.
We also feel this tension with regard to the United States of America and also the need to redefine our relationship with our American friends.
Trump's open criticism of Europe, sweeping tariffs and threats over Greenland.
We need Greenland for national security purposes.
Have been an abrupt wake-up call for the entire continent. That's especially visible in opinion polls. In 2022, just after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, trust in the United States under the leadership of Joe Biden was high across Europe, especially in Poland. Fast forward to 2025 with Donald Trump at the helm, and the contrast speaks for itself. As the United States is becoming a less and less reliable partner, the next move for Europe is to diversify and consolidate.
Poland's membership in the European Union and shaping it is our core national interest, because cooperation gives us an advantage.
For TVP World, Kazimierz Wysiak.
A major reshuffle in the Albanian government has ended in the dismissal of the Deputy Prime Minister Belinda Baluku. Accused of corruption, Baluku caused a stir in the country, with the opposition staging violent protests demanding government responsibility. Will her dismissal calm tensions in the country? Our Balkans correspondent Pavel Trzaskowski reports.
Such scenes have been commonplace in Tirana in the last couple of weeks. These clashes followed the controversies surrounding Belinda Baluku, the country's deputy prime minister. The Special Prosecution Office, SPAC, accused her of corruption, suspecting possible interference in construction contracts worth more than 200 million euros. This caused outrage in the opposition that started staging regular protests. Their ultimate demand was for Prime Minister Edi Rama to step down. For a long time, Rama defended Baluku, even proposing legal amendments that would prevent courts from suspending senior officials. But eventually, as the opposition was getting ready to stage another protest this weekend and the parliament was to decide whether Baluku's immunity should be lifted, Edi Rama called a government reshuffle and dismissed his deputy in the process. However, this move could be a nod to the international audience.
I think this is more a concession to the European Union and probably the United States as well, rather than the domestic opposition.
Edi Rama's Socialist Party won last year's election in a landslide, securing him a fourth term as Prime Minister. The opposition is in disarray and its leader, Sali Berisha, is himself facing corruption charges. Despite these spectacular displays of violence in front of the parliament, Rama seems to have a firm grip on domestic matters, with his sights set on Brussels.
His big legacy is to lead Albania into the European Union, or at least get it to the stage where the accession talks wrap up. So anything that endangers that is seen as a big problem.
In November last year, Albania opened the last cluster of EU negotiations, hoping to join the bloc by 2030. And it seems that Rama's deputy had to pay the price for the continuation of this smooth European integration. Pavel Trzaskowski, TVP World.
Poland's economy hit the accelerator in 2025 with faster growth, lower inflation, and a budget deficit that turned out not as high as initially thought. But that economic success story has been years, if not decades, in the making. Maciej Wilowski explains.
Poland's economy ended 2025 on a strong note. Growth picked up, inflation fell, and the budget deficit was lower than anticipated. The growth rate of Poland's gross domestic product, the value of goods and services produced in the economy, accelerated in each quarter of last year. By the fall and early winter, growth had picked up to 4% per year. The biggest factors behind that pickup: rising consumption and investment.
What we're seeing for Poland, which we think is particularly interesting, is that going forward we're seeing also an increase in investment. So growth will continue to come from consumption, but will also increasingly come from an increase in investment.
Slowing inflation, which fell to just 2.2% in December, has given consumers more purchasing power. And in the latest piece of good news, last year's budget deficit, a weak spot for the economy in recent years, wasn't as big as previously expected. Bank PKO, Poland's second biggest lender, projects that the deficit ended the year near 6% of GDP, significantly less than earlier forecasts, which put the deficit closer to 7%. And the bank's analysts think the worst is already behind us.
We think that the deficit will go down. Not very fast, but gradually. And this will be caused mostly by higher GDP growth, nominal GDP growth, than the growth of expenditure.
Today's economic success was decades in the making, the outcome of painful but necessary reforms.
In recent years, what we've seen pay off is a diversified economy, first and foremost, strong institutions, which is something Poland invested in early on, a market economy open to the world, open in the region, and also a focus on human capitals.
Poland's economy has come a long way. In one metric, GDP per person adjusted for the cost of living, Poland now ranks ahead of countries like Spain, New Zealand, or Japan, the International Monetary Fund calculated in its latest report. And with strong foundations in place for further growth, the country could rise higher in the rankings in the years ahead. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
On Thursday, Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski delivered his annual foreign policy address, warning of growing Russian aggression, shifting U.S. priorities, and the need for Europe to take greater responsibility for its own security. At the same time, the International Monetary Fund has approved $8.1 billion in new aid for Ukraine, even as questions grow about long-term Western unity. I'm joined by Michael Carpenter, Senior Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Michael, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here with us. Now let me get straight into it. So now I'm quoting. Europe has been tossed to the side while Russia is described as a potential partner for an economic reset. We read that in the U.S. national security strategy and hear that in discussions. We have been and will remain a loyal ally of America, but we cannot be suckers. Radosław Sikorski's words. Michael, these words may come or not as a shock, but are EU-U.S. relations genuinely deteriorating? Is the United States actually at risk of losing Central Europe strategically?
Well, we can have the conversation about whether the U.S. is losing Central Europe strategically over the long term. I'm not convinced, actually, of that. However, I would say in the short term, tactically, yes, the United States and Europe are clearly drifting in different directions due to divergence on a number of key strategic issues, such as foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, such as technology regulation and the future of AI, and then also having to do with a number of sort of more domestic political issues, such as, the U.S. administration's desire to support far-right parties across Europe. So, yes, there is, right now, I would say, maybe not yet decoupling between the United States and Europe, but certainly there's an element of de-risking on both sides, and more so, I would say, on the European side, who now, post-Greenland, see the United States as potentially a hostile power.
So do you think there may be a rebalancing these transatlantic alliance? I mean, we've heard, in our earlier reports, in the show, we heard, Alexander Stubb say that. We've heard Friedrich Merz openly admit that the relationship with the United States is shifting.
Absolutely, it's shifting, and it's shifting, I think, more quickly than a lot of people realize. So these leaders are absolutely right when they point to this. I would also point to the fact that Canada, which is a very, very close U.S. ally with whom we do enormous amounts of trade turnover every year, has recently engaged in hedging behavior with China, looking to the Chinese market as an alternative for the U.S. Not a complete alternative. They're going to have to continue doing business with the U.S. That's part of they can't escape that fact, given how large our economy is and how closely interconnected our trade and investment patterns are. However, they are starting to look at how to diversify. And I think a number of European countries are going to move in the same direction, looking at China, looking at other players like India, South America. You've seen the recent EU-Mercosur trade pact as alternatives to the United States.
That was my next question. I wanted to ask you, Michael, I mean, we're hearing a lot about Europe needing to diversify, this key word here, diversify, right? Give us a little bit of more details of what does that actually realistically mean?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a lot easier to say diversify than to actually do it, especially when the United States continues to manufacture some of the most leading edge defense capabilities like air and air defense assets, the F-35 fighter, obviously, the Patriot missile complex, and a number of other high-end capabilities that the European defense industry and European procurement authorities can't just suddenly replace that gap and look to buy only European. However, the move is already afoot, I think, to do more with procurement from European sources. When it comes to tech and certain things like cloud computing, again, the US is the giant. It's the hyperscaler, and Europe doesn't really have a competitive alternative right now, but already I think we're seeing the signs of policy groundwork being made in order to allow for European champions to rise in the future, say maybe in the 5 to 10 year time horizon. It's going to take substantial reform of capital markets in terms of pooling demand or aggregating demand on the European side in order for there to be more competition from within Europe. But yes, this is all underfoot right now because of this deteriorating relationship between the two sides of the Atlantic.
Michael, on today's show, I mean, you did speak about defense now and drones and so forth. I mean, on tonight's show, we focused quite a bit on the SAFE program as Poland impatiently waits to find out whether or not President Karol Nawrocki is actually going to sign the bill into law or leave it on hold. Now, the funds could, of course, transform Poland's military capabilities, but I want to ask you this. Now, the opposition is saying that the SAFE program would be detrimental to the United States, to U.S. companies, that the program discriminates against them. The U.S. Embassy says that also. Do you agree with this?
So look, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, I agree that the SAFE program is designed essentially for European governments to be able to buy European-made defense products. So to that degree, yeah, it does discriminate a little bit against U.S. manufacturers. But here's the thing. The United States has been telling Europe on a very loud loudspeaker over the course of the last 12 months that Europe needs to step up and do more for its conventional defense and deterrence. It cannot at the same time send that message and say, no, European governments should not be buying more European products. They should not be augmenting their defense industrial base, using, by the way, some of the same tools that we use in the United States through ITAR and other regulations, subsidies that allow for the Pentagon to procure American-made products. So I'm afraid that this is one where the United States is saying one thing, and it's not incorrect, but it does not accord with the policy of making Europe more autonomous, more able to develop the capabilities themselves that they will need in the future.
Again, I mean, and I think this can, it's safe to say that this act also goes back to the word of trust, right? I mean, contradictory remarks coming in. Michael, I want to ask you about the International Monetary Fund that has approved right now a new $8.1 billion aid package for Ukraine. Do you think it's a signal that institutional Western backing remains solid, even though this political trust, we can say, is somewhat fading?
Well, I would disaggregate those two things. I think the IMF package for Ukraine is very positive. The IMF is essentially a short-term lending institution. They don't assume that countries are going to fight wars that drag on past 4 years and require macroeconomic assistance for 5, 6, 7, or 8 years. The IMF is designed to plug gaps in the 1-2 year time horizon. So that's very positive. But that is not to be confused with the fact that there is diminishing trust between the two sides of the Atlantic. And again, we're now in late February, so it already seems maybe in this political era like it's ancient history. But the crisis over Greenland in January was really sort of a culminating point, because I think a lot of European allies were skeptical of the Trump administration before. But this moment when the Trump administration refused to disavow military force, at least initially, eventually they did, but at least initially, and we're using that as coercive leverage to try to acquire Greenland, that really put the trust factor in a spotlight, and it has caused a lot of European leaders to say, look, we just can't trust the United States, at least for the short term.
And do you think, I mean, if let me ask you this very briefly before I let you go, we have a little bit under a minute left. What do you think, I mean, in 5 years from now, with Europe, like you mentioned, is stepping up its game, right? What do you think that this transatlantic alliance could actually look like within 5-10 years from now? Very briefly.
Well, it's a great question too, and there's a number of different scenarios. The best case scenario is that this unfortunate lack of trust that we see today is like a shot in the arm for European politicians to make some of the deep structural reforms that are necessary to make Europe more competitive, both in the tech space, in the defense space, and in a number of other areas where European industry needs to be able to compete globally in a new era where European inputs, both in terms of the supply chain, in terms of the cost of electricity, are very difficult to square with a competitive agenda. So in the best case scenario, Europe gets its act together, makes reforms, and is able to act more independently. In the worst case scenario, hostile actors like Russia and China take advantage of the diminished relationship between the United States and Europe to test, to probe, perhaps some sort of unconventional operation, or maybe even a conventional push if we're talking about the era after the end of the Ukraine war. And that fragments European nations. In terms of Article 5 and also transatlantically. So there's many in-between scenarios, but there's a positive trajectory and there's a very negative trajectory. And it really depends on sort of what happens with the US political system as well after our next elections in this country.
And we will definitely look forward to how all that will unfold. Thank you so much, Michael Carpenter, Senior Fellow, International Institute for Strategic Studies, for being our guest here on World News Tonight.
My pleasure.
And that's all for this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya, and do stay with us here for more news and exclusive interviews.